I've got all the components for 2 different computer builds sitting around me, and I've got a crazy shirt. So that only means one thing. It's budget gaming build time. All right, so what have I got here? This is the AMD budget gaming build setup here. These are all the components for that build. And then behind me, hiding in the shadows next to the squirrel cookie jar, are the components for the Intel budget gaming build. Now, I'm gonna preface this with, this is a budget gaming build. This is not a budget build overall. These systems come in around $700, depending on what day you look on PC Part Picker and all the different, pricing websites. But I've seen as low as like $670, $680, as high as $720 within the last couple of weeks. I've been checking just out of curiosity. But for the most part, everything's pretty much within the same price range. And both systems price out within $30 to $40 of each other anytime you check it. So everything's pretty consistent here. So what did I do? So for the AMD build, I went AMD through and through. So AMD for the CPU, AMD for the GPU. And for the Intel side, I decided to change things up and stick with the classic combination so many people love with Intel and NVIDIA. Now on the Intel side, we are using the 20th anniversary Pentium chip. And I could have shaved a little bit of money off the build, but I didn't. I still went with a Z97 board because I was able to get one for under $100. That seemed to be a pretty decent board. Now, obviously, there's some things you can shave off of these builds. So when we go through the parts, I will point those out. But the two that will probably stand out to you immediately, just at the beginning of the video, there's an SSD here. You can drop that. And if you don't go for a super aggressive overclock, you can also drop the Hyper 212 EVO. So that's going to shave about $100 off the builds right there. So now you're in the sub $600 range for a very capable system. So let's take a look at the AMD parts. All right, I'm gonna keep things simple on myself. I'm just gonna go from right to left on this. So the Hyper 212 EVO, like I said, optional, but good for overclocking. Then I've got an MSI A78M E45 MATX motherboard. HyperX Fury memory, we've got 8 gigabytes of PC1600 there. And for the processor, I went for the AMD Athlon X4 760K, so essentially one of those A8, A10 series APUs, but this one does not have integrated graphics, so you do have to have a discrete graphics chip. For storage, 840 EVO is back again in the 120 gigabyte variety. Again, it's an optional component, but it does add quite a bit to the speed of the system, so I like to throw it in if you've got the money, as well as a Western Digital Blue 2 terabyte hard drive for your bigger storage. Then for the case, went for the Corsair Carbide Spec 01 because I was able to get this case for 40 bucks. So I picked up 2 of them at the same time because it was a good deal. And of course the Asus optical drive's chilling up there. Again, you could drop that too if you don't really feel the need for it. And then for the graphics, got the DualX R9 270 from Sapphire in the crazy fancy looking box. And then the Corsair CX series had a really good sale a few weeks ago, so I actually picked up 2 of those. I got a 500 for the Intel and a 600M here for the AMD. And then finally, 2 muffins in case I get hungry in the middle of the build. So there you have it, all the components. It's time to start ripping into some of these boxes and actually assembling this beast, budget beast, the Double B. I took a little bit of an informal poll on Twitter, and the vast majority of you wanted to see a full build video on this. So that's what you're gonna get, because that's what you asked for. At least the 10 or so of you who responded. So follow me on Twitter. Sometimes I ask stuff. All right, so it's time to begin. Step number 1, prep the motherboard. So first things first, get the motherboard out and then grab any of the cables that you're gonna need. So need my SATA and the back plate, of course. And I'll go ahead and take the manual and everything out too, just in case I need that. And then I like to use the box as like a little bench to put the board on. Okay, so then the next thing I do is I just take a quick general overview of the board, make sure everything looks like it's in one piece, everything feels solid, everything looks good. So everything looks all right, there's nothing blocking any of the pins, everything's set. So the visual inspection has passed. All right, the next step is to get out the processor. So here's the Athlon I was talking about, the X4 760K. Now, if I was going to skip doing the 212, you can see the stock heatsink cooler is in there, but it's not overly impressive at all. That's pretty much all it is there. It's pretty bare bones. So not the greatest in the world, but it'll get the job done if you need it to. But I'm gonna spend the extra 25, 30 bucks on the 212. There is the chip itself. Now, the difference between AMD and Intel on their processors is AMD still uses the older style where the pins are actually on the CPU and not on the actual socket, which is why when you get an AMD board, there's nothing covering the socket itself because there's no pins to protect. So what you want to do is lift up the arm, take out the CPU itself, and then just look at the back of it and make sure that all of the pins look like they are in one piece and they're all straight. And once you pass that inspection, then you'll see on the chip itself, there's a little arrow in the corner right here. That's going to align with the arrow in the corner on the motherboard itself. So once you do that, just want to line everything up. And it'll sit in place. Make sure it's nice and snug in there, but don't put too much pressure on it, and just return the arm back down. And you have just seated an AMD CPU. All right, next, it's time for the HyperX Fury. This memory is a really good deal, and I've seen a lot of people doing budget builds using this because it really is, you know, for the price, you really can't do a whole lot better. So you want to go ahead and lower arms on both sides. Make sure that your pins are lined up. There's a little, you know, bump in the middle here that aligns with the memory itself. You can see there. So just go ahead and put it in place. Pressure, pressure, lock. Same thing on this side. Now, I didn't read the manual for this board. It does vary from time to time on which slots you're actually supposed to use, especially in the AMD side. I'm just going to go out on a whim and assume that the blue slots are the ones they wanted me to use. All right, so now you've seated the processor and you've seated the memory, so the core components of the whole build are there. So now it's time to go ahead and put on the Hyper 212. I'm going to do it before I put the board into the case just to make things a little bit easier on myself. Not to mention it gives me something to grab onto when I'm lowering this into the case or the chassis. All right, it's Hyper 212 time. Been down this road countless times, actually. Hyper 212 and I have a long history. This is a very popular heatsink CPU cooler that I use. I really like the 212 because I find that it's really a great value for what you get. So I'm going to go ahead and get all of that out of the way. And I actually need a little bit of a refresher. So I'm going to unfold my crazy manual. Okay, that was a quick refresher. Now I remember. To do the install on the AMD side with the Hyper 212, you have to take off the pre-existing brackets that actually come installed. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, when you're taking these off, keep them somewhere safe so you don't lose them in case you ever want to switch coolers, because sometimes, especially with the all-in-ones, you actually need to put these things back into place, so you don't want to lose it. I like to keep everything for my builds in the respective motherboard boxes. That way I know, since I have so many different builds, which parts go with which build. All right, once all that's removed, then you're gonna have the kind of chintzy little backplate here, but just kind of ease that off of there. There's gonna be a little adhesive possibly that's gonna be holding it down. So just give it a nice little casual nudge out of the way. There's a little bit of glue around the edge. But everything looks good. So now I've got to take out the bracket that comes in your box of goodies for the 212. There it is, I already pulled it out. So when you do the Intel install, it kind of goes a different way. Intel, it's like this, and then AMD, it's like this, because these are the AMD mounts on the back. So you want to make sure that you have it the right way. All right, so what you're going to do now is you're going to need these little bad boys. You need this for Intel and AMD. The only time you need different standoffs for the 212 is if you are doing Intel LGA 2011, soon to be 2011-3. So then you take the back plate, and that's going to go around on the back side. So you're going to hold that up, and I'll cut to something that's a little easier to see in a minute here. All right, so what I've done is I've actually fed 2 of them through, because then you have to take the little bolt that it comes with and screw it down on the back. Like so. Rinse and repeat 2 more times. One thing to note as I awkwardly hold the board, these screws do have one side that's like slightly flattened, And it does line up that way when you go to insert it. So if you're trying to push it through and it's not going, just spin the screw a little bit and then it'll eventually find its alignment to go in there the way that it is supposed to. Don't force anything. If it's fighting you a little bit, don't fight it back. And then this handy little tool comes with, and what you use this for is to screw down the little nuts on the back. Again, don't go crazy with this, just use it to tighten things down. All right, flip the board back over. Ta-da, we have standoffs. Look, ooh, ah. Okay, this little bracket thing is the part that trips people up more than anything on the 212 install. Read your manual, and here's why. See this step right here? This is very important on how you orient the bracket. You want to make sure you get it right. You want to do this or this, not this. Don't cross them over each other. So the first thing you got to do with the bracket is you got to move the little pin. And if you just push in a little bit on the bottom part of it, down here, it loosens the pin and you can slide it. Slide it to the middle position on all four. And then I like to just make sure everything is going to align. So check your bracket alignment. Make sure everything's going to line up, which it does. We're good to go. Don't forget to take the sticker off. And since this is budget gaming build, I'm going to use the included Cooler Master thermal paste. Now on the AMD chips, I like to do just a line method. So once you get things flowing, I just like to do a line. Now the Cooler Master stuff is a bit goopy, so it's going to flow out in a way that's not optimal. You can see it's already kind of just starting to kind of go bleh, and just spread. And it's just the nature of the Cooler Master paste. Well, I'm not a huge fan of it usually, but you know what? The price was right. The price was included. All right, another thing, be really careful with this. These edges are incredibly sharp, and I've cut myself more times than I can tell you on this. All right, so I've taken the sticker off the bottom. Now the next thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you feed the bracket through and you make sure that it is aligned properly. So when you do that, you're going to need to collapse it a little bit to squeeze it through, and then open it back up again to that position that you tested that you know is the proper alignment. All right, another thing, this is going to be really hard to show. There is a little pin in here that has to align. Basically, it'll hold this thing somewhat into place so I can jiggle it and it doesn't move around too much. Just make sure that everything feels like it's fitting correctly. It's kind of common sense, but you want to make sure you're doing it the right way. So now I'm just going to drop it into place slowly. See, that Cooler Master paste is just kind of chintzy. It's already kind of going crazy on me. All right, slowly, 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 slowly. All right, now, everybody always wonders why I actually install it with the fan still on. It's because I can get it started and keep the fan on there. I always like to make sure that I'm not going to have alignment issues with my fan. This is a lot easier to do, leaving the fan on when you do the AMD, because it just slides right into those pegs. Plenty of room, so I don't need to worry about it. I really wish this came with one of those screwdriver tools like the Noctua does, because getting the screwdriver into these is kind of a pain. All right. You'll need to apply some pressure, and that'll get it going. I think that's another area where people get hung up on this sometimes. Yes, you do have to apply a decent amount of pressure to actually get started in the screwing in process. And I'm going to point out another thing in a minute here. I like to work in a little bit of a star pattern. That way I'm not over tightening any one area all at the same time. Now, as you start getting closer to having these tightened down all the way, if you're watching closely, I'm actually scooting the tower out of the way of the screwdriver a little bit as I'm tightening down. And that's because there is a little bit of play with the tower on the Hyper 212. All right, you'll feel them bottom out when you get there. Okay, all of them are in. Now, a lot of people get really freaked out that you can do this, that you can slightly move the CPU cooler on the actual CPU itself. It's okay. There's gonna be a little bit of give. It's gonna be impossible to get it completely tight. So the next thing you wanna do, take a look, see if any thermal paste started to kind of leak out the side at all a little bit. And if you can, just grab a coffee filter, wipe it up. Right, now you just pop the fan right back on again. It slides into the little grooves. Easy peasy. Done and done. My technique is a little bit strange. You may have your own, but I've done so many of these installs with this particular cooler that I know how to quickly disengage the fans and remount things. So like, for example, this cable, I don't really like where it's at, so I'm just gonna take it off. Boom, now it's out of the way. I can do a quick little tie off and plug it right in to CPU fan. There you go. Just as with cooking, clean as you go. Bonus points if you can figure out how to fold this thing back up. I think I've done it enough times. Look at that. Oh yeah, your 212 is gonna come with a couple extra brackets in case you wanna do push-pull, which I found really isn't hugely beneficial in any way. Rubber pads for if you decide to do that. And then of course the mounts for LGA 2011. All right, so I've taken the case out of the box, and this is the bad boy right here. The what the hell is this thing called again? The Spec 001. So yeah, not a bad looking case, especially for the price. It was again like $35 or $40. It was super cheap when I got it, and it had really rave reviews. So you know what? Listen to the internet. Sometimes they tell you stuff. First thing you gotta do, bust out your power supply. Look at that, boom, all shiny. So in the case of this case, lots of case jokes, you're gonna wanna put in the power supply first, and it's gonna go right in at the bottom. As soon as you get that in, then it's just time to drop in the motherboard, and then it's as simple as getting your drives in there. Now, this is a semi-modular power supply, which means it still does have some cables coming out of it at all times. Rip into it here. But not all of them. So the ones that are gonna be coming out of the power supply are gonna be things that you're always gonna need, more than likely, like your 24-pin power, and it looks like your auxiliary CPU power coming out of this as well. Hey, bonus, they included zip ties. I do have ventilation on the bottom of this case available, so I'm good to go there. So all I need to do is just drop this bad boy into place. Now you'll notice some of the cost savings techniques used on this case as I come around here to screw this in, still on camera. There's no real grommets, there's no rubber in them, they're just open, which isn't a huge deal for a case in this price range, but you can kind of see where they, had to make a little sacrifice there. And I'm noticing, obviously the construction of the frame is kind of chintzy. It's not the highest quality, but overall it looks like it's going to be a pretty easy build process in here. And that's what matters at the end of the day. If you had a little bit more money to spend, I would say maybe go for a Fractal Design Define R4. Revision 2, I think is what they're on now, or they have a blackout edition too. Or you could also go with the Entho Pro if you really want to be a big spender, because I had a really good experience with that case. And the very first thing I'm going to do is just get this guy the hell out of the way. I'm going to be sitting on him when I'm putting the motherboard in, but I really don't care. I'm just going to shove them in a hard drive cage for now. Speaking of hard drive cages, how do they have this stuff in here? Got to get all your little extra bits out. I really wish I knew how that, oh, okay. What do they give you in here? So it looks like they include a large number of screws, some more zip ties, some sweet L3004 or something number. Okay, so before I go any further, I'm just gonna get the motherboard in here and be done with it. All right guys, I'm at kind of an awkward angle here because I'm having to use my kitchen island since my office is all tore up and my usual build table is now being used as a desk. So the first thing you wanna do, grab your back plate. So stick the back plate in, it literally just snaps into place. It's kind of sharp, don't cut yourself. All right, so that popped in, just see. Wasn't as satisfying as it is on some of the more expensive cases, but hey. All right, looking at all the standoffs, it is set up for ATX and not MATX. So there should be a little tool included in here. Well, that sucks. My standoff removal tool was not included in the package. All right, well, without the tool that usually comes with a slightly more expensive case available, I'm just gonna have to use some vice grips and kind of size up here. Okay, well, I pretty well destroyed one of the standoffs just even getting it loose since I didn't have a removal tool. And it wasn't included with the case, but that's all right because we need one less for MATX. So I'm gonna go ahead and screw that into the hole that's gonna need to go into. So then the next thing to do, and this is why I actually like putting the heatsink on first, is just line everything up. And one thing I found with some of these, you have to take these little tabs and bend them up just a little bit on your back plate. All right, give it a little push, line it up, and there you go. And then one thing you want to do is just check, which you can't see it on camera because of the angle, but there's a little lips that come out of the back plate. You just want to do a visual inspection of those and make sure none of them got pushed down in front of one of your ports. Then you should have a bag of screws that pretty much coordinates to the number of standoffs you have, especially in the cheaper cases like this one, because they're not really going to give you anything extra. So lay those out and start screwing the board into place. I was a little off on one of my standoffs. Needed to move down one. Okay, all is well. Everything lines up. So go ahead and put in your screws, not too tight, but just tight enough, and then you can go back and do a final check. Now, as I'm screwing everything in, I'm already noticing some things about this case that are a little tricky. Your clearance at the top is pretty much non-existent, and I'm actually not even gonna put a fan up there for now. A, because one's not included, and this is a budget build, and B, because it's gonna be really damn close on the clearance even if you put one up there. So, it is what it is. Everything feels nice and snug. So there you go, motherboard's in the case. All right, so at this point, it's pretty much just housekeeping. Got to get your cables installed for SATA power and things like that. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug those in. Okay, for this case, the way that the drive cages mount, it looks like everything will face the back, so that is good. You just want to make sure you put it in so that everything is going to plug into the back so that you can take all of these ugly, nasty cables and get them out of the show. And here's one thing about this case that really kind of chaps me. It's kind of hard to see, but the power connection on the motherboard for CPU power is in pretty much an impossible to reach place from anywhere in the case without having to make a run directly across. So I'm gonna have to actually figure out how to handle that. Okay, this is kind of hard to see, but I had to run the cable through where the other cables went. So down here, up the back, out the top, over the Hyper 212, and into the jack. Now normally in cases that have more clearance, there'd be an opening right up here for you to be able to feed that through, because that plug is almost always in that same spot. All right, time to take advantage of my included SATA cables. Hopefully a right angle is going to be okay, because they give you two of the kind that have the little right angle on them. So hopefully that works out. Looking at the board here, we've got SATA 1, SATA 2. I like how they labeled that clearly. So SATA 1. And I'm gonna just do SATA 1 right now, so I know that it is the Samsung EVO 120. And then the drive cage that I pulled out earlier, as you can see here, has holes on the bottom, and that's for your SSD. The 5 1/4 inch drives actually won't need any screws, and you'll see why here in a second, if you haven't figured it out yet. I'm gonna bust out my OEM Western Digital Blue 1 terabyte. All right, so for the mechanical drives, there's kind of hard to see. There's little indents on the side, and these flex. So you just gotta line it up with the holes in the drive. Once you get everything lined up, flex the cage, done and done. Now, I like to alternate mount locations, so I'm actually just gonna take this one out. I'm gonna do the SSD in the top position. It doesn't need a whole lot of clearance or room to breathe. Then I'm gonna have a filler in the middle. Then I'm gonna do the mechanical. And the reason I do that is it gives me a little bit of play with the cables when I go to hook everything up in the back. Now I'm gonna do a quick spot check on my cable lengths here. Meander back on camera. I had to grab the extra eSATA cable because I'm not gonna make it up to the optical drive. All right, so now we are looking at the back in all of its glory. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm going to not sit on my SATA cables for one thing. There we go, that just popped off the front there, so I should be able to, if this is anything like cases I've used before, slide the ASUS drive into place and it locks. And it locks well, my goodness. Yep, that is in there solid. I really don't even need to put any additional screws in, but just for my OCD and sake of mind, I am going to give it one extra screw here, right where that one lines up. All right, then for my extra piece, I'm just gonna keep that with the box. Again, keep everything with everything, at least while you're building, so you can decide what you want, what you don't want later on. So now, basically, just time to run the cables. So remember I said I ran SATA 1 first for a reason? Well, now here's the reason. Now I know where to hook it up. Cable management's kind of a play-as-you-go kind of thing. If you haven't figured it out by now, this is just a pretty cash video. I like to have those every now and then. So go ahead and run that and run this. Then you gotta grab your SATA connections. And that was the one I designated for the top. So I'll go ahead and stick to the original plan here and take advantage of the space below my drives. I've got a drive cage that's gone wild on me. Everything's routed pretty nicely there, actually. Let me just get them out of the way inside the case. The cabling's pretty stiff, so I'm not gonna go too wild with the cable management here on this one. I'll probably just tie them down like that. I tell you, you guys wanted the full deal, you're getting it. So next is running my power up to my optical drive. And I'm gonna need to fish out another serial ATA cable, but not to fear, for I will grab one from my ASUS Z97WS board. So I have one sitting around. So we'll get to that at the end. For now, I'm just gonna kind of tidy everything up here. All right, so his butt's in there. All right, so now you kind of gotta take a look at everything and go, well, there's not a great deal of free space in this case. I don't know that I'm gonna be able to run this. It's gonna be unlikely that I'm gonna be able to actually get the case closed running the 24-pin behind. So what I'm probably gonna have to do, it looks like I'm gonna be okay with the SATA, and I'm gonna be okay with everything else. But the 24-pin cable, you're not gonna make it. So unfortunately, with this case, the 24-pin is just too big. All right. And that means for these cables, I need to make sure I route them in a way that they can lie flat. So that will probably work. All right, we should be able to close with that. So then the last thing to do is get this fan undone and then go run and get my extra SATA cable. And then do all the fun little hookups like USB and boot and power LED. So there is one case fan included. There is no exhaust. There are no top fans. All right, extra ASUS cable to the rescue. SATA 3. Okay, so everything is hooked up. I've cable managed about as well as I'm gonna cable manage with the limited space that I have. So there's pretty much where we are at this point in the build. I've got a bunch of scraps sitting out and various things like that. Looks like the fan on the front is an LED fan. Of course, the case does have a USB 3 and a USB 2. So that means we've got to take all these cables that I pushed off to the side. And this really is my least favorite part about doing all this. And I'm not even really going to be able to cable manage these out of the way either. Ugh. You know what, guys, you know how to hook these things up. I'm going to hook them up and I'll come back because it's really boring to watch. You just got to hook up your power and LED and all that stuff to the appropriate headers on the bottom. Probably going to have to reference the manual because knowing this motherboard, that's probably just how it's going to go. Hey, we're almost there. So it means it's time to put in the old Sapphire fancy 270, R9 270. And I just have a sneaking suspicion here that this is gonna be the winner of the two cards we have facing each other for the price. This and the 750 Ti, which will be going in the AMD or the Intel build, were both right around 150 bucks on sale. So they're pretty comparable on price, but I think this one's gonna edge it out in performance. So, wow, stop. you must connect this graphics board to the computer's power supply. All right, so there it is. Nothing too crazy, nothing too out of the ordinary. Just your dual slot, usual dual cooler design. Although I do need to peel off the plastic here. Now, I just have to make sure if there's a lock in place, that it's open. And then slide over here to my plate that apparently, I hate this kind of setup. It's one of those deals where you've got this back plate on here. There are separate screws along the edge. So just do an alignment check here for the top PCI, and it will be those two. Of course, they're positioned really in an annoying fashion, very inconveniently on the outside of the case. Again, save your brackets. Go ahead and get your card ready for the install. Line everything up, squeeze in here. All right, we're in. So the card is in. Now I've just got a really awkward angles here. I've got to screw this in. You'll get a better shot of it in a second here. Now I've got to put this fun plate back on the back, which really, I mean, come on, is this necessary? All right, then it looks like my power just plugs in right back here. Okay, all right, let's take a look at it. All right, well, the good news is everything booted on the first shot, so that's always a good thing. And the hard drives are all detected, and the optical drive is there. Fan spinning up on the Hyper 212, and the one fan in the case is spinning up in the front. So, the build experience, not the greatest case in the world. Really, it lived up to its $35, $40 price tag that I paid for it. So, it gets the job done. It's functional enough. It's fairly quiet since there's only 2 fans running in it, but it's pretty chintzy, and I actually ended up having to move, I'll show you the inside of the computer here. I ended up having to move the Hyper 212 into the horizontal position, which I'm really not a fan of because it's kind of a lose-lose, which I'll get to in a minute. But other than that, everything, you know, it looks okay. You couldn't do the best cable management in the world with this case because there just really wasn't enough room in the back. That 24-pin cable didn't really have anywhere to go. The back of the case bumps out a little bit, but it was just still, it was a little bit too tight to make it work. So that's living inside the case in the visible area, but the glass on the, or the plastic on the case is a little bit tinted, so you really can't see it too much anyway, unless you put an LED in there. Now, the 212, the reason I'm not a big fan of using it in the horizontal orientation is with the type of CPU or GPU that I have in this case, it's not the blower style. It blows the hot air from the GPU back into the case. So if I have the fan set up how I would ideally like it to be set up, where it's exhausting the hot air from the CPU out the top, that means it's going to be sucking air in from the bottom half of the case. And without a fan on the back of the case to feed cool air directly into the 212 for it to pull out, it's not really going to work out too well. And numerous people posted the last time I mounted the 212 in this orientation, which was in the 8350 build that I did for my dad, they mentioned that they did the same thing and noticed the CPU temps would spike during gaming sessions because the GPU would be pumping out a lot of heat. That being said, I've set it so that it's pulling air in from the top and feeding air into the case through the 212 EVO. So that's kind of a trade-off. That means now I'm pumping hot air down into the area where the GPU resides. So basically, it's a lose-lose without having enough cooling in the case. Ideally, I would like to have an exhaust fan on the back, but we'll see what happens with temps. As you can see here, you know, I'm idling, you know, at about 48. I've had this computer on for probably 40, 45 minutes now just to make sure everything was okay, and that seems to be kind of where it's settling. So, you know, not the best temps in the world, but, you know, I did my research beforehand to make sure that's what I could expect, and that's right about where I should be. So nothing surprising there, and the internal temps on the case seem to be doing all right. Once we get some gaming going, then I guess we'll see how the cooling works out in this little, what is this? I keep forgetting, the Spec 01. So that being said, build wasn't really hard at all. Now that I know how the case works, the Intel build should go nice and quick. So get that one done. I'll probably just time lapse it, show you the components, and then we'll have the two ready to go. And I'm actually going to do a video of the Windows install process as well. I've had quite a few people ask me about the Windows install process and how I go about my drivers and what order I do things in, and you know, just generally how I set up my SSD and my hard drive and all that stuff. So I'll just walk through that. you know, just kind of casually go through the install process with you. So if you found this video helpful, please go ahead and click on that subscribe button. You can also follow me over on Twitter at TechUploaded, and I'm on Facebook, search me there, and you can also send me an email at techuploaded@gmail.com. And you know the drill, don't be a stranger, check back soon.